everyone, and welcome to the Investigamer, the show where we don't just play the games, we explore them. Now today, I'm going to be putting my £27,000 university degree to use. I'm going to be taking a look at two pieces of media and comparing them based on the merits of their visual storytelling. Now, for those that are familiar with my various channels' histories, I did this video, well, I uploaded the dissertation on my old The Randomizer 118 channel, and I'm going to be going through the similar topics to what I covered in that dissertation. It has been updated slightly, and as a result, this is a purely Halo piece. In the original, I talked about aliens and the Justice League and Marvel Cinematic Universe, all of that good stuff, whereas this is just going to be purely about the games, because that's what we are here. We are the Investigamer. So without further ado, buckle up, enjoy, and I've completely butchered that intro. It's not what I had written at all. Now, back in the day when I studied at university, I did my dissertation on the art of visual storytelling through the medium of motion picture. In this dissertation, I talked about how we're being told things a lot more now in media rather than having to put the pieces together for ourselves. To illustrate this, I took Halo 2 Anniversary and Halo 5 Guardians and compared the two based on their different prologues. But there are some examples I had to leave out of my dissertation in the interest of time, so here we are, the full story, the director's cut, the DX version. Are we losing the art of visual storytelling? After Halo Combat Evolved became the definitive game of the first-person shooter genre, the developers of the game, Bungie, realised that they needed to jump right back into production to make a sequel that was received.
If Halo CE was the golden child, then Halo 2 was the badass younger brother that just didn't give a fuck.
An unrivaled success story.
I remember being in elementary school, and one of the cool kids of what was it, second or third grade, came into school holding a backpack like there was something he shouldn't have in there, like there's something like, yeah, you don't. It's like a drug dealer about to show you what's under the trench coat. But it's just, yeah. But he just comes over, a bunch of us huddle up in him around in a circle, and he just shows us a copy of Halo 2, and it's just, how did you get this?
I feel like Halo 2, more people knew strategy.
Positively, by fans to say the least. Halo 2, considered by many to be the crown jewel of Bungie's library, launched in 2004 to critical acclaim. GameSpot's Greg Kasavin described the game as having a highly replayable campaign, and when talking about the story itself, Eurogamer's Kristen Reed said that the game has hugely impressive cutscenes, regularly interspersing the action to deliver one of the most rounded sci-fi tales ever to feature in a video game. Smash cut to 2015, and 343 Industries are running the show now, and they've just dropped their Halo 2. Halo 5 Guardians released to a depressingly poor reception from critics and fans alike. Kotaku's Ethan Gatch described it as two hopelessly uneven games smushed clumsily together, and Eurogamer, when writing about the game's campaign, said that 343 has so much work to do, it's failed to establish Locke as a character capable of carrying a Halo game. In the same article, they went on to say that 343's Halo trilogy story-wise doesn't look like it's going anywhere particularly revelatory. Now, just so you're aware, the scenes I'm going to be using from Halo 2 are actually from the HD remaster released in 2014. The reason I'm using these ones compared to the originals is that everything is largely identical between the two versions of the game, and all the little details I'm going to be picking up are a lot easier to spot in the remaster. The remaster is also easier to compare to Halo 5 visually, and now that that disclaimer is all done and dusted, let's see what about Halo 2's introduction captured the admiration of so many people, and where Halo 5's fell short. A big factor in writing for video games is that, by and large, you're writing for two audiences. Those that play a game to experience the story.
Difficult this battle might get. If anyone ever tries to do you harm, then I will heal you. No matter when or how bad the wound, I hope you know.
And those who don't particularly care about the story and play it to be
Is you.
a walking tank, kicking ass and taking names. A lot of storytelling in video games is done with the aid of visual signatures. Anything from body language to how claustrophobic an environment is, a word called iconography, even something as simple as the colour and lighting can have an impact on how you view a scene and what you can read into it to learn about a character. As mentioned before, we are going to be looking at the prologues of Halo 2 Anniversary and Halo 5 Guardians to look into how they visually communicate the story to us using the factors I've mentioned above. Colour can affect you without you even being aware of it as well. It's deceptive like that. I mean, think back to those times where you were in your GCSE English class and the teacher's rambling on about why the curtains were blue and how that affected the character's mood, and you're sat there thinking like, bitch, what the fuck you smoking? The curtains are blue because the curtains are blue. The guy liked blue, that's it. That's all it is. But it's deeper than that. I mean, every colour in the world is there to serve a purpose. I mean, red is danger. You know, you see red, you think danger. Yellow is a warning. Green makes you feel safe. Every colour serves a purpose. The colours in Halo 2's opening tell us so much about who these characters are and what their intentions are going forward into the story. 3 colours in particular stand out in this opening more than any other, with these being red, purple and green. Red is used in this opening to show the player the characters to watch out for in the game. The very first shot of the game has the colour red reflecting off the surfaces of a Covenant ship and the nearby High Charity. This tells us that these inhabitants of these ships are dangerous and that they're going to be our primary antagonists going forward. This is further reinforced by the red worn by the Prophet of Truth, who seems to be acting as the leader of the Covenant, and by the scars on Tartarus's face and the brand he uses on the Arbiter later in the scene. Purple is a colour used by many to represent the wealth and power of a person or character. Now, I'm going to have to channel a bit of my inner foot of a ferret to give you a brief history of the colour purple. This notion of wealth and power comes from the long and complicated history of obtaining the colour you see today. The dye trade was historically centred in the Phoenician city of Tyre, now known today as Lebanon. It was here that the colour purple was born, as the Phoenicians learned that by cracking open a couple of Bolinus brandaris, a species of sea snail, extracting a purple mucus from the snail and exposing this mucus to the power of the sun for a very select amount of time, they would yield them a portion of purple dye. However, here's the kicker. A snail is small. The amount of mucus you'd get from it is even smaller still. The amount of residual dye left over after the extraction would therefore be tiny. It's reported that it took up to 250,000 snails to obtain 1 whole ounce of usable dye, hence the astronomical price to purchase a piece of purple material. And who were the richest people in the world back then? Royalty. Christ, I don't know how he does it. Back to Halo. This connection to wealth and power is a great fit for the Covenant, as their ships and infrastructure is largely covered in purple metals. This tells us that they not only have absolute power on their side, they have the means to manufacture it too, making them a subconscious force to be reckoned with. Green is the third prominent colour in the prologue, being to the humans what purple is to the Covenant. Green, as we know, conveys a sense of safety to the viewer, letting us know that we're back in a friendly environment, letting us relax and open up to the story on show here. The olive green of the armour worn by the Master Chief and the Marines conveys a further sense of innocence, implying to us that these characters have done nothing wrong. This sounds a bit daft to begin with, as we know that these characters are at war, and it does take 2 to tango. However, when you factor in that the Covenant started the war by glassing Harvest, it doesn't make you question if you're on the good side or not. Now, the use of lighting in Halo 2's opening scene does an incredible job of setting up the characters for the rest of the story. The white light that bathes the Arbiter and the Prophets reveal them to be the righteous and divine figures in the room, as white is the colour that typically depicts faith and purity. This applies to both the Prophets and the Arbiter, as the Prophets are the ones in touch with the gods, and despite being on trial, it transpires that the Arbiter is actually pure in his intentions in this game, and he does everything he can for his people. This theme of purity is extended to other characters, whether it's reflected off the Earth to tell us that humanity is the innocent party in the conflict, or on John to show him as the beacon of hope for humanity in the fight against the Covenant. The last and strangely obscure character to be lit in this white light is Tartarus. Although he isn't necessarily a holy figure in the Covenant, this light serves to foreshadow his rise to become the Prophet's right hand. Shadow is just as important as the inclusion of light. The use of shadow here tells us just as much about the characters as being bathed in light did. The Council are swamped by shadow. This tells us that they're a force ever present within the Covenant, yet one ominous in its true size and intent. This ominous feeling is further conveyed by the shadows that fall over the Prophet of Truth's eyes and Tartarus's face. Both of these shadows convey to the player that there is a hidden motive at work within the Covenant hierarchy. By contrast, the use of lighting and colour in Halo 5 Guardians opening is boring. The whole thing tells us next to nothing about these characters and what makes them tick, but I'll mention what I found anyway. The first thing I found interesting in this scene was the way blue light is being emitted by the center UNSC console. This light bathes Fireteam Osiris inside the Pelican and lets us know that the UNSC is in control here. Blue is generally seen as the colour of authority. Think of the police, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you get the picture. The way it covers everyone here conveys a sense of domination over these people and subservience on their part. The colour blue and the connotations to authority are further referenced by Spartan Locke, in that out of all the Spartans on board, he reflects the most amount of blue off his armour. His helmet also has a blue visor. If we were to compare this to how the Prophet of Truth's eyes were shadowed hiding his true intentions, this shows us that at his core, Locke is an authority figure. Colour after this, however, seems to lose all of its importance as the blue light disappears and we see that 3 out of the 4 Spartans have a remarkably similar grey armour colouring. This makes it so much harder for us as the viewer to work out and keep track of who's who when they jump out of the Pelican. Seriously though, watch this clip and see if you can tell me which character is which as they supposedly introduce themselves to the audience.
Comm check.
Comm's working fine, Lab.
Copy that, Tanaka. Spartan Buck online and ready.
Spartan Vale online.
With the lack of colour comes the lack of personality. There's no real reason to care about these characters as they're supposedly fighting for their lives in the midst of a Covenant war zone. The only one with any coloration does live up to her connotations, however. Spartan Vale has a deeper red coloration on her armour, which indicates feelings more in line with courage and willpower than with typical red anger. She duly shows these traits by jumping onto a Covenant Phantom and taking out the hosts on board single-handedly. The only other good points that I can see are really quite basic, so I'll list them very quickly here. Besides the blue light, the characters at the beginning are shrouded in darkness, which gives us an ominous feeling about these characters and what they're up to. The green being used to signify the team to jump also tells us, the player, that the story has started now. And the red in the fire at the end of the scene surrounds our characters and tells us that this team is dangerous and that they shouldn't be taken lightly. In visual media, there is no better way to tell a character or a person's deeper, darker motives than by looking into their body language and seeing what that says about how they're feeling in their given scenario. Halo 2's opening scene does such an incredible job at conveying the mindset of each character to us as a player that we immediately know where we are in the story despite being totally unfamiliar with these characters. The Arbiter's body language throughout the scene takes us on a roller coaster. It starts with him assertively telling the Council his account of the events that happened in Halo Combat Evolved. You can tell he's confident in himself here by the following markers. He has an upright, relaxed body posture, he maintains direct eye contact with the Prophets, and he has relaxed facial expressions. Compare this to his body language in the scene of his torture. His body language here lacks all the assertive markers he had at the start of the scene, and in its place, a more slumped posture, poor eye contact with other members of the Covenant, and his head is now lowered as if bowing. These are all hallmarks of a submissive character, telling us that the Arbiter is no longer the same defiant elite we saw at the beginning of the scene. The Prophets are both submissive and aggressive characters at the same time, carrying traits iconic of both of these mindsets. They have slumped postures and they are seen to be fidgeting in their seats, suggesting them to be submissive or weak. They also show themselves with clenched fists. They have narrowed eyes, which are used for long periods of staring. They also have dominating behaviours when they address the Council at large or when they address Tartarus personally. This tells us that these characters, despite not being physically dominant, have and maintain a level of control over the others, appearing to be more dangerous than they are in actuality. Fear keeps people in line. The human characters, by and large, are presented as cool and confident, relaxed characters, with them standing in upright, open positions. This also makes us as a viewer feel more comfortable with them, as when people are comfortable with each other, they tend to have matching body postures. The only exceptions here are Miranda Keyes, who is seen fighting tears when she is presented with a medal for her deceased father, and the Master Chief when he hears alarms blare. He readies himself for orders instantly, while the other characters look around bemused. Iconography is found very sparingly in Halo 2, but where it is found conveys some significant meanings. The Arbiter and the Prophets are set up to be reminiscent of holy imagery. The gold headpieces of the Prophets present us with similarities to the way that light emanates from holy figures in religious portraits. The Arbiter goes a step further than the Prophets, as he is heavily implied to be this story's version of a messiah, starting with his trial being reminiscent of the Sanhedrin trial. The way he is stripped of his armour, reminiscent of the way Christ was stripped of his robes, even to the point of being put on a cross to die. This final act, like Christ, sets him up to begin his resurrection, to lead his people from the darkness as the Arbiter, and not as the disgraced Thelvadami. Halo 5, surprisingly, falls short again. There's barely anything unique to the characters that will tell us more about who they are. The only time there is anything unique about them is how they act when they're being briefed at the beginning of the scene. Tanaka and Vale both get up immediately and start prepping themselves upon hearing from Lasky about the casualties on the 5 colonies. This shows them to be the more compassionate ones of the group, eager to help. When Sarah Palmer, the Spartan commander, comes online to give them the mission, Locke instantly gets up and starts prepping at this point. This tells us that Locke's focus is more about the mission at hand and not necessarily the people suffering around it. Buck stays seated throughout, listening to the entire thing quite intently, making sure he has all the cards in his hand before prepping himself. This keeps him in line with his pre-existing character thanks to the interactions with Oni Spook and lifelong partner Veronica Dare in the events of Halo 3 ODST, and with the betrayal of Mickey Crespo, one of his original Alpha 9 comrades, in the events of Halo New Blood. Other than this, there really isn't much to say, other than they're all standing in open, confident positions, with the same markers on display as the human characters in Halo 2's prologue. But the environment they're in and the mission they're about to be given would suggest an uncomfortable setting, and as a result, this whole introduction comes across as a bit disjointed. So what does this mean for the future of visual storytelling? With the trailers and announcements being fed to us in Halo Infinite's pre-release cycle, there's barely anything being told directly to us. Brohammer69 over here shows that he's terrified at the prospect of returning to the fight and is desperate to leave. Why? What's down there? Who scared away the UNSC? In the campaign gameplay premiere trailer, this is further hammered home, and the one that has the UNSC on the run is revealed. He doesn't tell us his name. He doesn't tell us how he rid the ring of the UNSC. Instead, we're shown scenes of banished forces occupying UNSC strongholds. I mean, this is good storytelling. It shows us that the Banished is a force unlike anything the Chief has come across before. The room is bathed in red and the doors slam shut, reminiscent of a predator snapping its jaw shut, telling us that Chief is in imminent danger. Our antagonist's body language is phenomenal in this scene too. He is seen as unflinchingly confident, and he presents himself as a more dominant figure than we've seen from Halo's more recent Rogues Gallery. He is completely calm in the face of Chief, as his body language is extremely open and relaxed, telling us that he genuinely doesn't see the Chief as a credible threat. He can also be seen bowing his back slightly, and now, unlike when the Arbiter bowed his head in Halo 2, this bowing is more in line with an adult stooping to talk to a child, showing him to be genuinely patronising towards Chief. He even shows a slight glimmer of despondent emotion in his body language when he recounts his lonesome time on the ring. This tells us that this brute is as afraid of showing his soul and his deepest emotions as he is of the Chief, giving him one hell of a third dimension. The final section where we are transported to his location and see him in the flesh for the first time shows us another side of his character. He feels a kinship with John, both being the apex fighters of their respective forces. His body language shows him trying to encourage and pump up the Chief to get him to come and fight him face to face, mano a bruto. This one character alone has displayed more deep and genuine emotion than the entirety of the cast of Halo 5 in one monologue. Even Chief in the brief E3 2021 trailer had far more subtle and genuine character development than was ham-fisted into him in Halo 5 Guardians. The complete disregard he has for the decimated Banished forces contrasts beautifully. to the way he gently handles the UNSC's dead, giving Chief a depth that feels real for once. So, in conclusion, I'd have to disagree with myself where in my previous dissertation I wrote, "So yes, ultimately I do believe the art of visual storytelling is on the way out. With bigger and bigger budgets come lots more room for complacency." Here, however, from the little we've seen, I think it's safe to say that Halo is getting back on track. I think we're in line for a much more deeper and richer experience from Halo Infinite. This is fantastic. As a Halo fan that's been through the 2010s, I'm so happy to have my boy back. Like, I can finally be proud of my boy. And that's a good feeling. Oh god.